Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing really good. Welcome back. We have a few minutes, about 5 minutes, and then we'll get class underway. But anybody here, welcome, and hope you're having a good week so far. I know it's been kind of tough with the fires. Some of you might have been affected, but hopefully nobody's had too much difficulty with it. And we're all here to support each other anyway, so just take care. But yeah, we got a few minutes. Hey there, Adeline. Good to see you. Just gonna pull the meeting up on my phone, so I have it in two places. Hello, hello. Hi, guys. Nicholas, Megan, and everybody else. One sec, I'll be right back. They're always just kind of right out of the frame, so just so you know, if I'm looking around like, what's over there? It's these cats. Oh yeah, well, you know, Peachy, she's feeling a little shy today, I guess. Is it Peachy? Good kitty. You want to, hey. She loves it, so yeah. Measure bike, okay. Good afternoon. Eddie, what are you doing over there? Eddie, big boy, what? He's a little more camera shy, I guess, than Peach, but he makes his appearances sometimes. Hello. Hey, Mateo. Hey there, Alex. Good to see you too. Just another minute, pretty much. Oh, you finally got the Switch. Okay, great. Any games you got to start off your collection, or what are you playing right now? If you know, you have, I don't know. Maybe you're just playing online stuff. But good afternoon, Jennifer. Mario Kart and Smash Brothers. Good selections. Yeah, I have a Mario Kart, so at some point we might have to race. I'm not good at Smash Brothers though, so I mean, I know there's people that are like professionals who play it for a living and everything, the big community of Smash, but I'm not the one that knows how to play too well. And yes, 100%, I am getting a PS5. I'm not going to get the new Xbox though. I've never really been into the Xbox system. I know there's a lot of great games, but I am going to definitely get the new PS5. Yeah, no, the level of skill that people have in Smash Brothers is actually pretty amazing. So anyways, it's 2:30. Welcome everybody. Good to see you guys back again. So let's just kind of take a sense of where we're at. First of all, yeah, we just did the quiz on Monday, so thanks everybody for preparing for the quiz and taking it. I'll be grading those as soon as I can. They'll be ready within a week or so, and then you'll get a notification that you can simply check with me for your grades. As usual, my policy is that I like students to make their individual grade requests, and when you do, I'll be able to give you a reply within a day or maybe 2 at the most. So I've been able to stick to that rule throughout the semester, and I notify people on that basis. But anyway, yeah, so I'm working through those. I'll send the answer key and give you guys the notification over the weekend probably, or sometime in the middle of next week. Okay, and so we've now closed the door on, well, not completely closed the door actually. These fallacies are still going to be with us for a moment because we're going to take about a week to talk about the media. There's a couple chapters in our book, chapter 10 and chapter 11, that talk about critical analysis of mass media and media messages and the internet, and also a critical analysis of marketing and advertising. So that's the sort of topic for us. It's a sort of mini topic in the class. We don't spend quite as much time as some of the other things, but it's still important and it's definitely relevant and current. So we're going to have to think critically about media. So I want to start by just going over some of the notes that I have for chapter 11 on media critical analysis. And in a way that's kind of going backwards, but I think the textbook itself was poorly organized on this point, that they talked about advertising and marketing in chapter 10 and then the media in chapter 11. But I mean, you kind of have to talk about the media first before you discuss applications of it to like the world of marketing and consumerism. So let's just discuss some of the material on chapter 11. This is a little bit of a more breezy type of lecture in a sense because I don't have like a million pieces of vocabulary that I will write on the board, and a lot of it is a little bit more conversational and just dialogical, but I will call your attention to a couple of key points that I wanted to identify from the material in the book. Okay, so good critical thinking skills require us to be good at judging the quality of arguments and information that we receive from whatever source. And one major place that we do get information and content from is the media. So good critical thinking skills require that we're not just able to analyze the arguments that people exchange in everyday life informally one-to-one, but also that we're able to critically analyze and engage with media information and advertising and marketing that we see. So we're going to look a little bit today at just an overall view of the history of mass media in the United States, and we'll learn a little bit about how mass media depends on advertising dollars for its revenue. We'll develop, or at least try to develop, some skills for critically evaluating information that we see in the news, how to evaluate scientific claims that we hear about in the media, and also to examine the influence of the government on media reporting. Also, we will discuss for a little bit the impact of the internet and how to bring these critical thinking skills to bear on, our consumer habits as we are exposed daily to all kinds of advertising and marketing. Okay, so mass media in the United States. It's kind of amazing when you think about how much media we consume in an everyday way as modern day citizens of the United States, or really in just anywhere, but particularly in the West and in the US. We take in so much media every day. And so media encompasses a pretty broad range of tools and resources that we all use. So media encompasses and includes television, cell phone, internet, and then the traditional print media that you find in like newspapers, magazines, and other publications of those kinds. So since we're exposed every day to so much media and marketing, we're kind of in a way drowning in it, and we therefore have to be able to be aware of its influence on us so that we can critically evaluate it, and maintain our own independence of thought and judgment. So before television, before the advent of television, which of course is relatively recent in overall historical terms, it's something that's only come to exist since World War II pretty much. But before that time, if you go back in the 40s, early 40s, and behind that, before that, the main forms of mass media were radio and magazine. So of course back then, you know, if you wanted electronic media coming at you, you would not be able to tune into or log on to the internet or turn on a television because these things don't exist yet. But there was radio broadcast, okay? And then there was also, of course, newspaper and print media. So way back in the day, before we had TV, it would have been radio, magazine, and print media, and that's the initial forms of mass media in our country. So I just kind of want to call attention to a few terms mentioned in the book here. Mass media versus niche media. Okay, so mass media is just a form of communication that is intended to reach and influence a large national or international audience. Okay, so a form of communication that is intended to reach and influence a large, either national or even international audience. Okay, mass media. Mass media is characterized by the widespread extent of how many people it reaches. And yes, Kimberly, these are not fallacies. We're moving beyond chapter 5, and now we're talking about chapter 11, which is all about mass media. Okay, but you know, we will actually discuss fallacies a little bit in connection with this material because there will be some discussion of how there are fallacies that are found in advertising and marketing. Actually, the third homework, which I will give you guys more detail about in the next meeting or over the weekend through Titanium, has to do with you finding examples of fallacies in advertising and marketing materials. So there will be some connection to the last lessons on fallacies, but for now, no, these are not fallacies. These are just words, mass media versus niche media. So mass media is a form of communication that is intended to reach and influence a large national or international audience. As I was saying, its number one characteristic is the widespread reach that it has. So this is media that's not intended to be geared toward a narrow target audience. It's supposed to reach anybody and everybody. So you got to think of the big major broadcasting companies and media organizations like, Fox, ABC, NBC, CNN, etc. Right? They're not limited in their appeal to just one or another demographic. They're broadcast to the wide audience of the world or the country. But then in contrast, in comparison to that, there's what we call niche media. And this is media that is geared towards a more narrow target audience. Okay, so like, for example, if you're watching people on like Twitch, playing video games or something, that is a form of niche media because it's dedicated more to a narrower demographic of people, like gamers and young people, than just everyday folk, right? Like just anyone in the public. If you're, I don't know, watching like the Home Shopping Network, that's a niche media that's geared towards those interested in making online or telephone purchases of products. Some media outlets, in other words, are designed to reach and to appeal to a specific subset of the population. Like you have media that is for a more characteristically child audience, like Nickelodeon or whatever. You have media that's geared toward a more stereotypically young male audience. I don't know, like some people talked about Spike TV back in the day. I don't know if that still exists. There's some that are geared towards a more characteristically, stereotypically feminine audience, like Lifetime or the Oprah Network or something like that. And then, of course, when we take view of other forms of print media. Like there's all kinds of magazines and such that are geared towards a specific subset of interests, like Guns and Ammo, just for firearm enthusiasts, Sports Illustrated, just for the avid fan of sports and athletic competition. So we just have to know that sometimes media is very broad and general in its outreach to the public and to the world, and then there are some forms of media that are targeted towards a more specific type of audience. Okay, so by the time of 1930, about half of the United States homes had a radio. And in the early, before the early era of television, in the 30s and early 40s, there were only a few radio networks that did all news and entertainment. Back then, if you wanted visual news, like what we take for granted today when we watch TV or see something online, published in a news organization, if you wanted visual news back then before television, you would have had to go to a movie theater where they were showing film reels on certain days of the week, and so people would actually go and it'd be like a communal act to go and watch the news broadcast and projected on the screen. But of course, after World War II, television started to become developed and found its way into more and more U.S. and households worldwide. But for years, in the early era of television, there were only 3 networks, 3 stations. Does anybody know what those big 3 are? Anybody have a guess? The main 3 television networks that were like your only 3 channels to choose from for the early era of TV? No guess? Let me see if you have a guess. I don't know. Let's see. Anybody know? Not CNN. No, CNN's a cable network, which came much later. So it's also not Fox. Of course, it's not MTV. Sorry, Eric. No, but you have 2 of them there, Lena, CBS and NBC. So there was ABC, CBS, and NBC. All right, so between these 3 stations, you would have had all of your media options for viewing and so forth in the beginning of television. Since then, mass media has had a larger and larger influence over all of our lives. Let me read a bit from the book which discusses that. By 1930, half of all American homes had a radio. In the 30s and 40s, a few large national radio networks broadcast news and entertainment to the whole country. Even after television made its appearance, soon after World War II, for many years there were only 3 national commercial stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC, plus in some areas a few independent local TV stations. The increasing presence of mass media in our culture has changed our lives. Since the 1950s, more and more of our experiences have been shaped by the corporations that control the media rather than by family and educational institutions on which past generations relied. On the other hand, though, on the positive side, without these mass media corporations, we would not have the free or relatively inexpensive access to entertainment and information, including news, consumer reviews, and online databases that we now enjoy. So, I mean, imagine the world before the explosion of mass media that has become possible through television and other forms of electronic communication. Before this era, if you go back in time, even just 100, 200 years ago, most of the information provided to you about the world, about what's going on, would have been disseminated through just a couple of big sources. It would have been a much more simple time in a sense, because a lot of the teaching and instruction that you would have received would have come to you from more local sources, like parents, the institutions, like your schools that you're a part of. Nowadays, it seems like the media diet that we all thrive on and live on can substitute for a lot of these time-honored traditional ways of gaining information. But as the book mentions, there's a positive to this too. We have so much more information at our fingertips and so many more media viewing and consuming options than any previous generation. So there's kind of like a positive and a negative element to that. So as we're looking at the world today in 2020, television, cell phone, radio, magazine, print media, all these different forms of media are so widespread that they give us many more media choices and options. And audiences are also more specialized today. We talked about niche media. There's been a vast proliferation of that, from having 3 monolithic media broadcast institutions to having almost one for every possible subtopic or interest or demographic that you could imagine. A disturbing trend that we see accelerating a little bit, I believe, right now, and it's mentioned in the book too, is this trend towards people selecting their media on the basis of their political ideology or affiliation. That's kind of, in a way, an expression of confirmation bias. So, like, you know how that is. When a person, let's say, is more, I don't know, stereotypically liberal, left-leaning, maybe they're going to watch, like, NPR or MSNBC, or on the other side, if a person's more stereotypically conservative politically, then maybe they only watch Fox News or Breitbart or One American News Network or something. So it's like when a person tailors their media consumption habits to reflect the views that they already have, then they're not willing to see those views being challenged or analyzed critically. If you had lived in previous generations, you wouldn't have had like a station that corresponds to each different person's political ideology. There would have just been the news, and we would have all had more or less agreement on what the facts are. But nowadays, people can sort of confine themselves to a silo of like-minded information, sometimes called an echo chamber, where you only hear reinforcement for the views that you prioritize, and you never hear them challenged. And when people of different political beliefs or persuasions cordon themselves off into these information bubbles where no critical challenges to the ideas entered the bubble, then people after a while stop agreeing on what the basic facts are. And it's hugely destructive to the well-functioning of society and democracy, as I'm sure you guys can understand from just living in America right now. So it's hard to say what the solution for that is, but part of it is critical thinking. People who are good critical thinkers don't necessarily confine themselves to only friendly information that supports their existing attitudes and opinions. There's also another disturbing trend, as we're talking about this just kind of openly, of more and more consolidation happening in terms of control over the news media. So in 1983, if you go back in time a bit, there were a lot more news media organizations that did the work of providing us with content. So it would be over 50 companies back then in the early 80s. But by the turn of the last decade, 2012, and continuing on to the current day, it has been increasingly controlled by a smaller number of corporate stakeholders. So that's mentioned in the book here on page 336. As it says, so at the same time that news media options are proliferating, a select few large corporations are controlling more of it. In 1983, 50 corporations controlled the majority of the news media in the US, but by 2014, the media was controlled by 6 corporations, which include Time Warner, Disney, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, Bertelsmann of Germany, Viacom, and General Electric, which owns NBC. So when you have fewer and fewer media companies that are the owners of the distribution of the information, then you worry about losing the diversity of viewpoints that we might have had in a more, I guess, a diverse set of media shareholders and stakeholders that used to exist in the past. And you have to worry a little bit that these news corporations are also interested in maintaining their bottom line, their profitability. So one way that they do that is by donating to political campaigns. So major media organizations will oftentimes make big political contributions, and in some cases they're doing that to change policy in a way that's more favorable to the media organization, as it says here in the book. In addition to influencing the public through their productions, news media corporations also try to influence public policy directly by donating millions of dollars annually to congressional campaigns and tens of millions more to lobbying efforts. Television, radio, and wireless internet all rely on airwave radio frequencies to send and receive messages. Media lobbyists have tried to persuade Congress to privatize those airways, which are currently regulated by the government through the FCC. Another aspect of fair criticism of media is the way that it is so heavily concerned with keeping advertising revenue flowing. Because it is the advertisers who, let's say, produce commercials that are aired during the intermissions of your viewing that pay, that sponsor the cost of the media broadcast overhead costs. So without these advertisers and sponsors, the media corporation would lose profitability. So they need to make sure that they don't upset their sponsors, pretty much, their corporate sponsors that are doing these ads. So think about that, right? If you're a news media organization and you're getting a big, kickback from like Coca-Cola to run Coca-Cola ads during the intermissions, are you going to allow your nightly news team to run that hard-hitting investigative journalism about the harms of sugary drinks? Are you going to allow them to run that story on the corruption going on in the big beverage lobby? You probably might not want to do that, right? Because if this story runs, then it might tend to inform the viewer in a way that is going to make them less favorable towards the product that's being advertised during the commercials. So sometimes the quality of information that we get can sometimes be censored or marginalized because it runs contrary to the profit motive of the media organization. Okay, so that's something that we always should be a little bit aware of. There's the possibility for information to be, limited or controlled in a way that prevents us from making better consumer decisions. Now, as we go on, the influence of traditional forms of print media, like newspaper, magazine, and even television, has declined over 30% since peak levels were reached in around the year 2000. So, year 2000, it seemed like there was more influence and revenue given towards those old school forms of media than ever before. But since the year 2000, now it's 20 years later, their influence has declined by at least over 30%. What do you think could be the reason for that? Why do you think it is today that reading a physical newspaper or watching TV to get news or information is on the decline? Why would that be on the decline, perhaps? Talking about print and television media. What's happened since the year 2000, maybe, if you were to guess? What could be the explanation for that? The declining influence of print media and television. Well, okay, Sebastian, people do use Twitter and social media a lot more. That's a fact. But overall, in the bigger picture, social media is something that is a part of what? I mean, you gotta think back to a time maybe before even you were born, when something that is involved with social media wasn't so big. More access to technology, sure. And you guys saying social media, technology, it's like we're dancing around the one word, the internet, right? Yeah, so the internet, the World Wide Web. I know if we're living today as we are, we may be thinking, well, yeah, the internet, it's just so monolithic, it's just so ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Kind of take it for granted. But you shouldn't take it for granted because it is really, really relatively new. I mean, I'm old enough, being so old, that I can remember a time when the internet really wasn't a major thing. I mean, in the 90s, when it kind of started, you had your AOL and you had dial-up internet, and it was going so slow. It would take forever to just download an image. And, you couldn't have people using the phone at the same time. So back then, the internet was kind of like a novelty. But of course, you all know how much it's an important part of everyday life now. Why am I still a young soul? Well, thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. I guess we're all young at heart, isn't that right? Or maybe you're an old soul. What's the compliment? But either way, it's good. So yeah. The rise of digital media, social media, and the internet has certainly declined the widespread influence and impact of older forms of traditional media. Also, there's another reason that priorities have shifted a little bit in terms of media consumption. The labor costs of news reporting are sometimes expensive, but nowadays we can have a lot of news that's just crowdsourced on social media. So if you want to know about something that's happening, a lot of times the first place you can go is Twitter, see what's trending or see what tweets have been produced on the topic. And that's sometimes a way to get blazing fast, up-to-date information that takes longer for the mass media to pick up. So by looking at iReporting, just crowdsourced information, we eliminate a lot of the labor costs that used to be associated with hiring journalists and having them do their investigative work. There's another sort of disturbing trend in a way when it comes to media consumption. It seems like if you observe the habits that people have when they go on and look at things in the media, there seems to be increasingly a movement away from hard news towards lifestyle, entertainment, and gossip. So a lot of people, when they're watching the news, they're just worried about what celebrities are, making up or breaking up, or what's entertaining, like sports, or just lifestyle stuff. There's a trend away then from hard-hitting, information that's kind of exposing political scandals or corporate scandals or informing people about, actions that they should take to improve on their communities or whatever. So even though there are more news sources today than ever before, the ironic thing is that people are not necessarily more well-informed than in previous times of history, which is sad in a way because, right, if you know, if your great-grandparents and stuff wanted to know about something, they wouldn't have been able to just Google it and get the information right away. They would have had to like go out, find a book, study something with a teacher, and get the information in that way. It would take longer to get. It's not right there at your fingertips. So they might have thought, wow, if we had a tool like the internet, you know, imagining the future, how much more informed we could be, you know, to have like basically every fact right there just a few clicks away. But the sad thing, if anything, is that even though we have access to so many more media options, the effect of this trend away from hard news towards lifestyle, entertainment, and gossip, the trend towards increasingly using social media, which the information is not vetted, and a lot of times there's unreliable information there. It's almost like we're so overwhelmed by info and competing claims. The lack of centralization can make people less well-informed. And the ability for them to distract themselves with like 1,000 different media options also leads to some people being less informed on the major issues of the day. So although we have the tools to be way more well-informed than any of our previous ancestors, we're not all using those tools sometimes to get that status. But anyway, it's not all just sad and doom and gloom. When these media organizations do their oversight job well, and you have good, qualified journalism, then they can expose important government or corporate scandals that benefit all of us. And we should, of course, be very much respectful of and, in a way, valuing the free press. You know, because if you don't live in a free democratic society, then you don't have a free press, and anything that runs contrary to the status quo or the interests of those that hold power will not be reported. So as much as there sometimes is misleading, trivial, or even just false information that we find in some corners of the media, we shouldn't just disparage it as something to be dismissed or you know, denigrated, because if we didn't have a free press, then we would be living in a society that's significantly less free. So let's talk here. I just have an actual quote from the book as they speak about the value that can come from good, enterprising journalism that's done well. It says here that, so I'll just read it here. Another change in the past few decades has been a trend away from reporting government and foreign affairs and toward reporting entertainment, lifestyle, and celebrity scandals. With cuts in budgets, news broadcast stations are also relying more on citizen or amateur reporters as well as self-interested information providers such as corporations, think tanks, partisan activists, and government press releases. Thus, while Americans have an increasing number of news sources, they are no more informed than they were 2 decades ago. At the same time, the news media have played and continue to play a key role in exposing corporate and government scandal. The expose of John Rockefeller and his oil monopoly by editor and journalist Ida Tarbell resulted in a federal investigation and Supreme Court's eventual breakup in 1911 of Standard Oil. In the early 1970s, Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post were instrumental in exposing the 1972 Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Nixon. So when they do their oversight job well, they can deliver us important information that we want to have so that we are aware of what our government or certain companies are doing. One other, I guess, fair criticism to mention on the same topic is that the rush to get the scoop, the rush to be the first news organization to report something, can sometimes result in inaccurate reporting. So that's important for you to know. Oftentimes, the first reports that hit the public are not the most accurate because sometimes the media organization is trying to be the first one, and therefore they don't necessarily vet or properly source all the information. You'll notice this sometimes when there's like an emergency, like a mass shooting, like the initial reports about how many people were involved in the shooting, what their motives were, number of victims and stuff. A lot of times that can be kind of chaotic and misreported. You know, people that are there on the scene, they hear multiple gunshots and they think there's more than one shooter. Sometimes it only takes, it takes some time basically before we can get the real facts. Since in the rush to be the first to report on the events, incorrect information gets promulgated. Another fair, interesting example of that was that in the 2000 presidential election, Bush versus Gore, everyone wanted to be able to be the first to call the winner, right? You know, because that's like a major scoop. If you're the news organization that breaks that story, that's going to help drive up your ratings, right? So it was looking close, but then Florida was like this tipping point, as maybe some of you have read. And in the end, they called it for Bush. But in the beginning, they said that it looked like the numbers coming in showed that Gore would be the victor of Florida and thus the election. So the election was called for the other candidate, Gore. Of course, the Supreme Court got involved and some of the ballot counting was ceased. But long story short, that rush to be the first to report resulted in an inaccurate report. And as we all know, it ultimately Gore lost. So just a few facts and interesting points of info about mass media. Now I just want to transition to discuss a little bit about the internet. So the 90s was the decade where the internet really started, but the use of it has kind of exploded in the new century, this 21st century, and it's more than tripled since the year 2000. Today, more than 2.2 billion people are online. So it's obviously a very important aspect of our everyday lives nowadays. I mean, here we are online as we speak, engaging in this form of media, the presentation of this lecture to you. You know, how many American high school seniors do you think spend or are on a social networking site? Like, for example, it's a high number. This is a textbook that came out in 2017. So, I mean, the numbers are relatively, I think, current. But it almost seems like a low figure. 94% of college freshmen are on some type of social media networking site or, you know, social media site. Seems like it's almost everybody between Facebook, you know, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, Twitter. But it's almost everybody. And over 25% of those around your age, college freshmen, are on these social media sites more than 6 hours in a given week. American high school seniors sometimes spend more time on social media than studying, and that, some claim, has an adverse effect on grades, although everyone believes they're the exception to the rule. You know, oh, I'm not the one that's going to have my grades negatively affected by my social media habits. But there are some scientific studies that do indicate that, you know, you become a little mentally distracted from the topics that you have to focus on in school when you're too exclusively wound up in your internet social media accounts. But anyway, I mean, obviously it's given us a lot of opportunity to network, to communicate, to be connected with each other. Hard to imagine how we would be doing during this pandemic if we didn't have the social media tools that we all take for granted now, right? If we didn't have the internet, for example, we would really be caught in a tough situation, not able to communicate so freely, or just using the telephone, kind of hard. People seem to be able to do anything online nowadays, especially now as we're speaking during a pandemic. We're almost forced to do more. We can go to school online. We can buy you know, our groceries or different consumer products. You know, we can shop online, as many of us do. We can search for you know, relationships online. We can entertain ourselves online. So almost everything, job seeking, conducting the interview, that we can do like in real life, now more and more of that seems to be capable of being done online. But it's making, once again, traditional print media obsolete. So we need to be able to think critically about what we see, hear, and post on the internet. The textbook makes a mention that you should be a little bit careful. You should have careful judgment about what types of things that you post. Now, obviously, a lot of people, when they're on their social media sites, they just set up an account that's not linked to their real identity. Like, you give a fake name, especially on Twitter, and you feel free to just say pretty much anything. But, you know, sometimes you should be at least a little careful, I guess. I mean, this is kind of the textbook speaking more than me, but obviously if you post things that are illegal or overtly sexual or derogatory or, like, you know, offensive to people, then that can sometimes come back to haunt you, right? You have to sometimes think not just about the intended audience, like your friends and people that you're trying to make laugh or whatever, but also the unintended audience, like employers, you know, people who have some kind of power over you, authority figures. So basically it just reminds us that we should take view of that and be a little conscientious when we post things. But as I'm speaking to you, just from my own point of view, I do believe powerfully in the freedom of speech. And so I think that, you know, within reasonable limits, you should feel liberated to say and post things that you really feel. But again, it's well advised to not just go overboard with that, because sometimes the things that you post, you know, they never go away, and that can adversely affect you. At the same time, though, you know, sometimes you look at public figures, the things that they say online, and it's sort of like, is there two standards here? Like, if you have a high enough position of power, you could just sort of say anything. But if you're an everyday person like us, that might hurt your job prospects or your employability. Sadly to say, there are double standards. So you just have to think about that a little bit. And can't always take the cue from following the leader, because sometimes these leaders have more, they're given more latitude than we are for the same behavior. Okay, so the internet, some call the great equalizer, because it makes the discussion and dissemination of information so broad, right? Anybody can just kind of tap into the discussion and the conversation of democracy, of political debate, or whatever else, moral or philosophical debate. So it does have a powerful ability to assist in the functioning of democracy, which relies on people discussing issues. There's a quote here that I would read, I guess coming from former Vice President Al Gore. Ironically, I just mentioned him, but he says here, yeah, so he says, the internet is perhaps the greatest source of hope for reestablishing an open communicative environment in which the conversation of democracy can flourish. The internet is not just another platform for disseminating the truth, it's a platform of pursuing the truth and the decentralized creation and distribution of ideas. So, you know, when we use the internet to organize, to discuss, to debate, that can assist in the functioning of democracy. And that has been seen in, for example, dissent that has occurred in like certain regions in the Middle East, the Arab Spring, as some have called it, where protest movements led to the overthrow of longstanding dictatorial rulers. That would not have been possible without the organizing tools and networking abilities that that social media provided. So it certainly has its ability to have a productive impact and to assist in the functioning of democracy, but we should always be wary because many of the claims that we read and encounter on the internet, especially social media, can be false. Oftentimes they're not vetted, so we always need to make sure we cross-check the evidence. You know, if you see a claim written, reported somewhere on the internet, see if you can corroborate it with other sources. Oftentimes people just, you know, they want to find confirmation for an existing belief, and therefore they have a very low standard of evidence. The first person who says something like that, they're like, see, one media organization said that, so now I have evidence. But you have to be a little bit more scrutinizing than that. Otherwise, you know, you'll just end up believing whatever you already have a tendency to believe, and you're not really getting information. Be also alert to the invasion of privacy, harassment, and fraud. Obviously, we're all vulnerable when we're online to people either harassing us or, you know, selling us a false bill of goods and ripping us off, scammers and others. So, you know, be a critical thinker when you're online. Understand that there's a lot of predation and there's predatory behavior online, and sometimes people are just out to troll you, right? They don't have the right to do that. I guess they do have the sort of freedom of speech right to do that, but in terms of just being a polite citizen one to another, they ought not act that way. But you're going to be exposed to that type of treatment sometimes online. So be prepared for that and know to try and not take the bait and act better on your own end. They talk after that about how the internet can sometimes be used to find pornographic material. So they talk about pornography and plagiarism. It's kind of surprising if you know these facts, but pornography actually gets tons and tons of web traffic. I mean, maybe that's not a surprise, but it's a fact, and it's as much as 30% of all internet web traffic in the United States has to do with viewing pornographic imagery or videos. Now, obviously, a person's free to do that as an adult, but be mindful that you want to make sure you're doing it in a secure way if you view those types of things, because if you're at work or on someone else's computer, you know, that can obviously result in some type of oversight that would be bad for you. Obviously, if you're responsible for children that you have custody of or that you're taking care of, then you want to make sure to have some type of protocols or safety mechanisms in place to prevent people that are children from viewing images that you don't want. There's, of course, security devices that can be established, software that you can download that can create a little bit of a wall between them and those type of materials. What's web trafficking, Gabby? Well, I don't know if I use this term. Trafficking means to distribute something in like sort of mass quantities or whatever. So like drug trafficking or would be like trying to move a bunch of drugs around. But web trafficking, I don't know. Would that be perhaps distribution of information by means of the internet? This is a term that I'm not 100% familiar with, but you know, I could sort of infer the definition. I think I have to wait, though, to give you an answer because I don't want to say something I'm not 100% clear about. Okay. Yeah, well, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. Trafficking on the web in certain information. Okay, that's a different phrase. Trafficking meaning like, no, okay, Gabby, now I understand what you're saying. What we traffic in on the web is sort of like what we go to, what we look at, what we distribute. But the word trafficking, as we know from our studies on equivocation, can be used in multiple different senses. So I traffic in philosophical information and critical thought courses that I teach. That's the stuff that I deal with. So I traffic in that. But you can also use the word in another context to refer to the distribution of goods that you're trying to put out into public. Sorry to use the word. I didn't mean to bring any strange or obscure associations, but there, I hope that clarifies a little bit. Okay. Yeah, so it's hard to monitor children all day, and obviously a lot of these security systems that you try to establish so that kids can't look at porno or whatever, it's not so hard for them to get around it. A lot of times they'll just be like, confirm your age. So it's hard to put a lid on that, but to the best of one's ability, it's probably wise. Then they're talking about plagiarism a little bit. So a sad fact is that over 60% of college students at some point in time have used the internet to find information to help them with an assignment in violation of the course policies, and otherwise some type of plagiarism, although there's degrees of that. Obviously plagiarism is wrong, it's deceptive, it shows resistance to learning the material that the teacher's trying to teach you. If you take information from another source and you present it as though you wrote it or that you created it, you're both stealing the other person's information and you're also refusing to learn it on your own and come to know about it on your own. But that obviously defeats the purpose of school. It's totally dishonest. If you get a credited grade on that, then it's not even your work that's getting the credit, which obviously the grade's supposed to depend on the merit that you demonstrate. So media literacy, another little term that I want to put on this board. Not a ton of vocabulary for us today, but just a few. Media literacy. So that's just, as the book would say, the ability to understand and critically evaluate the influence of the media. The ability to critically analyze and understand the influence of media. Media literacy is actually one of the most important skills to have in this new century that we're all in. Because you want to be able to determine what's a true or a false claim in the media, what you should rely on and what you should not rely on when you're being talked to as a consumer or just as a citizen. But it's difficult because this is something that you don't really learn in school. I mean, you learn how to read, so you have like basic literacy, like literal literacy. But media literacy means that you know how to distinguish between reliable and unreliable information encountered in the media. And since there's so much more media than ever before, since there's like a bunch of competing claims and disagreements about what the facts are, you're put in a position to make many more careful decisions about how to assign truth or falsehood to these different claims than people in the past. Like, again, I remind you that at your grandparents' time, there wouldn't have been like 100 different news stations, one for each different political philosophy or idea that each person has. You would have just had the same news that everyone else had. And so you wouldn't have been able to like find some corner of the internet where people are going to be pushing claims that correspond to whatever it is that you happen to believe. Since we have so many more menu of options available to us today, we have to be that much more judicious about what we determine to be correct or incorrect. So, this was a problem that perhaps our forebears and ancestors before us did not have so much because there wasn't so much media that they were dealing with. But today we do, so we have to. We can't let it control us. We have to be in control of our own lives. So let us try and make sure to apply the 3 stages of the critical thinking process to our engagement with media. That's mentioned here in the book. So as we remember, the first step is experience. In other words, be aware of how you experience the media, just what it is that you see reported and how you experience it. Ask who created this information and why. Ask yourself how much of this media information do you take in and where do you tend to go to find information and facts. Ask yourself, is this satirical? Is this trying to get a laugh out of you, or is this honest and sincere information? Maybe note the message that's being conveyed, and also pay attention to little subtle cues, like what is the appearance of the set? What is the use of any graphics or sound effects? Sometimes, like, to lead into a story that they want you to feel some sense of fear about, you'll see the presence of like dark and foreboding music, or some type of attempt to make the graphics portrayed on the screen appear like scary or threatening. Or in another case, if it's like a lighthearted story, that might be accompanied by like silly sounding little music or trivial sorts of graphics to highlight the frivolity of it. Note the music or set design or appearance of graphics used. Also notice the time that's devoted to different stories and to advertisements. You can sometimes tell the priorities of the news organization by determining how much time is given to various types of stories, right? Sometimes the stories that they don't want to emphasize are running contrary to their vested interests. So you'd be, as a digitally literate, media literate person, sensitive to all these factors. Okay, so after you've experienced the internet, or not the internet, the media and the internet, you would next think about how you interpret it. Make sense of it by asking yourself what values or points of view have been expressed. Examine your own reaction to the information and the information and production that you are watching. Why do you have that reaction? Do you find yourself being resistant to it? Do you find yourself celebrating it? Ask yourself what the reaction you have to the media information says about you. Does it demonstrate that you have confirmation bias? If so, try to mitigate that by taking in information from a variety of different sources. Sometimes, you're going to have to get an objective sense of the facts. Examine media reporting from either side of the ideological or political spectrum. And then sometimes the truth lies in the middle. That helps to prevent narrow-mindedness. So don't necessarily, again, focus and prioritize only some media information sources. It's healthy to have a diverse set of points of information to make your judgments based on. Ask other people too. Compare notes with others. Ask your peers, colleagues, friends, what is their interpretation of the information given, and take their viewpoints seriously and see if that helps to illuminate your own reaction. Finally, just analyze these media messages and see if your analysis is rational or is it driven by emotion. Note any resistance you have to other interpretations of the information. Okay, so that's what I was going to tell you guys about mass media and the internet, but I do have a little bit more to say about advertising and marketing. So let me just quickly speak on those topics too. And this is all having to do with chapter 10 of the book. So like I said, I wanted to start with the chapter 11 because it's more generic about the media, and then chapter 10 after that because it's more focused on advertising, which is a subcategory of the media. So we all know that we're exposed all the time to advertisements. When we watch a video like on YouTube, a lot of times you have to sit through the ad from the sponsored ad, and you want to click through it, at least if you're like me. You don't like ads, so you want to click through it or open another window and wait for it to end or just mute it. But whatever you do, you really can't get away from these ads. They're everywhere. They're not just on the internet, but they're on your TV. And they're not just on your TV, but they're on billboards everywhere. They're on the back of signs that are posted out there. People's clothes that they wear are just like walking advertisements. I mean, you see the Lacoste alligator, so I'm kind of like right now serving as one sponsor for Lacoste. The branded logos and stuff are like walking advertisements. So we're just awash, literally saturated with media and marketing impressions. Why are some companies so good at marketing and advertising? Well, in this chapter 10 review, we're going to learn a little bit about the marketing strategies that they're using and the critical thinking skills needed to both do it well if you're in that field, but also as a consumer and a citizen, knowing how to avoid being manipulated or misinformed by marketing and media info. Okay, so there's three main purposes of ads. I want to refer to that. One, to create product awareness. A second possible function or purpose of ads would be to inform consumers about a product or service. And then the third purpose of advertisement, like why do people create them, would be to motivate consumer demand. Okay, so I'll just try, if I can, to explain these purposes of ads. First of all, to create product awareness. Sometimes the purpose of the advertisement is just to like remind you, hey, the product exists. Just be aware of that fact. You'll see advertisements like that that don't necessarily try to tell you any information about the product or why it would be suitable to your needs or to your interests, nor are they even trying to do anything to necessarily stimulate the demand, but just to remind you of its existence so that you're aware of the product. So like if you're driving down the highway or something and you see one of those billboards and it just has the big Coca-Cola logo, you know, in that cursive font splashed against a red background or whatever, you just see the logo and that's not telling you anything like, oh, here's a new flavor or here's what it does. It tastes great, it's less filling, or, you know, it's just Coca-Cola. Or you just see the big Nike swoosh on like on a billboard. That's just reminding you, hey, everybody, Coke, Nike, it's out there. Just to be aware of it, to have it like in your brain so that the next time you're out shopping for some product that they, you know, create, that you'll remember the existence of it just by means of having seen that ad. Another possible purpose of the ad, and the second one's a little more classic, like the more traditional purpose of ads, would be to provide information about the product or service. So, you know, like you watch a car commercial and they might tell you some facts about the car, like, oh, this car has like a all-wheel drive and like it's 10-cylinder, 8-cylinder car, and it has this great safety record. They show a guy like, you know, doing like a maneuver with it and like, look at how tight the steering is. So, you know, they'll tell you features of the car, information about why it might be a good car for you to buy. So some advertisements try to give you the sale. They try to drive the sale by telling you why this product is so good for you. And another thing could be just to motivate consumer demand. I don't know, like say, for example, that on the packaging of the Coca-Cola at the supermarket, it says, buy this, you know, 12-pack for a chance to win like a new PS5, you know, so inside of the packaging, there's going to be like a little tab that says like, oops, you didn't get it, or maybe you did if you're like really, really randomly lucky. That function of the ad is not really telling you anything about the product or service. It's not just reminding you that it exists, but it is trying to stimulate your demand in some way by inducing you to want it because of some other reason. And these three different purposes of ads can kind of combine sometimes. Sometimes, you know, more than one of these functions can be achieved simultaneously through a single ad. These different things, these ads that achieve these different goals appear in all types of settings, physical settings, digital settings, and everything in between. Now, by its very nature, an advertisement embodies a kind of argument in a way. An advertisement is trying to persuade you. It's trying to persuade you, you should buy this product or service. So the conclusion of the advertisement's argument is, therefore, you should buy this thing. And the premises are whatever reasons given, if any, that that's a good thing for you to do. But notice that because they are advertising products that they want you to buy for the sake of profit for them, they're not always gearing the information towards the truth. A lot of times, it's just towards profit. And that means that in some cases, the advertisement may contain little information about the value to you of the product, and sometimes it may even exaggerate that information about the value to you of the product. So, you know, you're the consumer. You have your own self-interest. The companies and advertisers that market these products to you, they have their own different self-interest. And sometimes you need to know that these two things are not aligned. Like, they'd be fine in many cases if you spent a lot of money on products that you don't need and that you might not even have wanted if it wasn't for the effect of the advertising on you. So to serve your own best interest, you have to be able to determine when the product is really something that's good for you. So every day we are exposed to so many advertisements. Marketing research firms spend millions of dollars every year to identify the target audience of their product and then create ads and placement that are geared towards them, right? So one example of this is what happens with the Nielsen rating system. So there's a rating system for television, you guys probably know that, which monitors the amount of viewership of certain programming that's being placed on your TV schedule. And the Nielsen rating system can therefore determine what kind of demographics there are and how much viewership there is. So if the media broadcast company learns that, hey, this is a show where there's a lot of kids watching, or there's a lot of women watching, or there's a lot of men between the age of 35 and 50, then they're going to create advertisements that will target those type of demographics in the intermissions and commercials. And I'm sure you guys know that. Ads are placed in the programming to try and drive the sale for a type of audience that would likely view that type of production. Sometimes there's what is called product placement too. So let me give you a quick note about that concept. What's product placement? Product placement. So this is when the product or advertisement for the product is placed in the programming itself instead of during commercial breaks or at another time. Okay, so when the product being advertised is placed in the programming itself. Instead of during commercial breaks. Okay, so a very effective way of marketing research firms to reach us with their advertisements, even if we're trying to get away from the advertisements, is to do this product placement. Okay, so licensing agreements have to be agreed to between a product sponsor and the program that puts this advertisement in their programming. So like if you watch, for example, I don't know, American Idol or some show like this, sometimes you'll see that some of the judges are sitting there, let's see, what was the example here, drinking a Coke, right? And that Coca-Cola that's shown on camera to the viewer at home, it's not an accident that it's there. It's not like someone just brought in a Coke with them, because you wouldn't even be allowed to show the logo and image of that unless Coca-Cola agreed with it, because it's now part of this official media product. So that means that Coca-Cola has actually paid American Idol to allow them to have this product placed in the show itself. So that's different, right? From like, okay, come right back after the break, and now you're watching commercials and you see a literal commercial of Coca-Cola. The judge or host that's drinking the Coke during the show is also part of product placement that's advertising for the product. And that is sometimes pretty effective. Can you think of other cases of product placement in the media and in media broadcasting? I can think of many others, but if anyone else has an example, throw it out there. What do you think? Another case where you're watching a program of some kind, it could be a film, it could be sports, and you're seeing products being advertised while you're actually watching it. Film, television, what do you think? What are some cases, if you've seen any, of product placement? Let me know. Dunkin' Donuts on AGT, America's Got Talent. Okay, good, yes. Music videos will also do that sometimes, correct, Natalie? You'll see like in the music video that there's like some type of fashion accessory or clothing line. In movies, when they show car manufacturers, okay, yeah, Transformers movies. They talked about the Transformers movies, I think, over here in the book. Sorry, let me get to that. Yeah, so let's see. The Audi cars in Endgame, good. In movies, when they show car manufacturers, absolutely. In sports, right, if you watch, like, I don't know, say NASCAR racing, there's a bunch of sponsors that are emblazoned on the cars, embossed on the car itself, so that you see that as like a moving ad while you watch the race. Or in football or something, sometimes there will be product sponsors whose products have ads placed on the perimeter encircling the field. In tennis, there will be like Mercedes-Benz logos sometimes shown on either side of the tennis net. so that while you're watching them hit the ball and play the point, you're also being treated to a little reminder of Mercedes-Benz. Here in the book, they talk about cases. Coca-Cola appeared on American Idol for several years. The logo for a sports apparel company such as Nike or Wilson or Sporting Goods may appear on sports uniforms and equipment in sports broadcasts. Automobile companies frequently use product placement. It's caught on in movies. In the movie Transformers, every car is made by General Motors, and so on and so on. So it's obviously a pretty effective tactic, because if you have a normal advertisement, you can, oh, Baskin-Robbins and Ant-Man, good. You know, if it's a normal advertisement, you guys know how to get away from those. You can open another window if it's on your computer. You can mute the thing. You can just sometimes skip it. But if it's in the programming, there's no way to get away from it. You can't be like watching a movie and then all of a sudden, you know, Apple MacBook comes into the movie and you're like, I'm not going to watch that because I don't want to be tainted by the influence of the ad. You know, you're already watching the movie and it's in it itself. So that's a pretty effective tactic, although some could argue that it's sometimes a little manipulative. Okay, because you can't mute or change the channel if it's in the program you want to watch. Next up, they talk a little bit about television ads and the influence and effect they can have on young children. Now, a lot of children use the internet and watch a lot of television. In fact, I mean, this is statistics from 2017, but it was already a big number, that there's an average of 4 hours a day of electronic media consumption by children. I would imagine that now we're in a pandemic, it's probably higher than that, because you can't exactly go out and play or do all the normal things that you used to be able to do. So if you crunch the numbers, this is like an average of 5 hours of advertisements that you view in every week. And over the course of a year, that's like 40,000 marketing impressions. When you think about the effect that has on these young, impressionable kids, it's pretty profound. Because they're so young and so easily influenced, ads are very effective on them. They cannot identify the fallacious reasoning or arguments that are being used, or the manipulative tactics that are sometimes being used on them. And sometimes the marketing research firms, they know this, and they will therefore cater to the child's sensibility and create advertisements tailor-made towards the attitudes and feelings and beliefs of a little child. So notice that like certain cereal companies will have like a cartoon character as the mascot, because these kind of sugary cereals are known to be things that kids like. And then by creating a mascot that it kind of appeals to a child's sensibility, it'll make them more willing to tell their parents, that's the one I want, right? McDonald's, they've got Ronald McDonald, like a cartoonish, childlike clown character that's sort of supposed to incur greater interest in it by a child. And once they've got you as a young person, right, and you love, the fun Ronald McDonald playpen and like Grimace and the other characters that they randomly have, the Hamburglar and stuff, you're going to grow up and become a lifelong consumer of that same product. Yeah, Happy Meals have toys as well. Good, Melissa, exactly. Notice that if you're watching like a child's TV show, Travis Scott Burger, I don't know, is this quite for the children of the world? I mean, maybe young adults even, but yeah, fair point. Yeah, so I mean, these little kids, they're obviously going to get easily swayed towards the product that they see, because they are not skilled or reasoners or fully developed, mature, critical thinkers yet. But by the time we're adults, we try to do a little bit better, and that's why we're talking about this now. Now, ads, of course, if we evaluate it critically, we can see the positives and the negatives. They can obviously serve, and they do serve, an important role by informing us of products and services that we may want. But they can also manipulate us into buying things that we don't need or that we might not have wanted if not for the ads themselves. They can manipulate us by appealing to our emotions through fallacious reasoning, rhetoric, and emotional language. So we have to be aware and learn what techniques are sometimes used. So there's a range of common fallacies that are found in advertisements. And this now is actually relevant to the third homework, which I'm going to assign to you soon. In the third homework, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to go and find advertisements that have fallacies, and you're going to give me an explanation of why that is the fallacy that you saw in that ad. But just for a couple of examples here on page 318, they talk about, okay, I'll read off some of this. Many ads rely on fallacies and psychological persuasion rather than credible information and rational argument. Scare tactics, for example, are used to create anxiety or play on our fears, insecurities, or sense of shame. You'll see an ad where like the whole pitch is like, here's a guy. He he's not wearing Axe deodorant. All of a sudden, girls don't like him. He puts on the Axe deodorant, now they all like him. So it's kind of, you could almost argue like a scare tactic, like beware, wear our stuff or else you'll never have success romantically or whatever. And so they talk about that. We are told that we're not good looking or thin enough. We have bad breath, body odor, or dandruff. That we have an unattractive personality or the wrong clothes, or that we're bad parents. I've seen this one Axe commercial where, like, you know, if you have dandruff or something, because they're advertising one of their shampoos, it's so off-putting to people, like, that they want to get away from you or something. So it's kind of like, hey, be afraid. If you're not using our product right now, that's you walking around shedding all this dandruff and grossing people out. Okay, the ad then promises a solution to the problem, which in some cases we didn't realize that we had, or maybe we don't have. Although some ads that use scare tactics promote products that may actually deliver on their promises, others go on to commit the fallacy of questionable cause by creating a false expectation that something wonderful, such as becoming more beautiful, thinner, more popular, or happier, will result if we use the product. That's another case, questionable cause. You see commercials like that where, like, okay, I don't know, I don't want to pick on Coke, maybe I'll say Pepsi, okay? Pepsi commercial, yeah, so like the guy's drinking Pepsi, and then the next thing you know, he's like at the beach with a bunch of beautiful people, they're having the time of their lives, they all look like they're just young and healthy, and so it's kind of making you think, oh, if I drink Pepsi, I'm gonna have these type of friends, these type of experiences in my life, as though that's some kind of causal connection, drinking a soda, and then any of these socially desirable outcomes. So questionable cause, that's common. Another common fallacy in the ads is the fallacy of popular appeal, which creates the impression that everyone's using the product, and therefore you should do it too. So yeah, you see ads like that. I've seen Apple iPod where, like, they show people in every country using their product, like everywhere around, and so the message they're trying to deliver to you is, we're all on this Apple stuff. If you're not wearing it or using it or, like, you know, taking that type of cell phone or whatever computer, then you're out of step with what's popular. People have actually been killed sometimes for their shoes, right? So the drive to have what's popular or what is in or fashionable can be pretty severe. Sometimes also the category, the subcategory of popular appeal called snob appeal is seen in these ads as well. A type of popular appeal by setting up an association between a product and famous people that are athletic, popular, or living a desirable lifestyle. Ads for alcohol frequently associate drinking with enjoyable activities and being fun to be with person. There's also inappropriate appeal to authority. That's when the person who's the sponsor in the ad is in no way an expert on this type of subject. They gave the example of George Foreman's grill. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about that grill, but it's a decent grill. The thing is, though, George Foreman is a boxer. I mean, he was a heavyweight champ boxer, also got the gold medal in the Olympics, but this is not necessarily an expert on culinary arts or you know, being a chef. So it's just because he's so popular and everyone thinks he's a nice guy that making him the product sponsor maybe gives you a sense that he's endorsing something, which is good for me. And that happens a lot. You know, I've seen a case where a famous physicist was doing an advertisement for an investment app. That's not the sort of expertise that you bring to being a good investor, being like a genius scientist. So again, inappropriate appeal to authority is seen often. Sometimes hasty generalization, you know, they stereotype categories of people, like women are in some advertisements, you know, all like looking like models, or men are all looking like just mindless kind of pleasure-seeking people. Matthew McConaughey in the Lincoln car ad, that's a great example, Carissa, yes. This man's an actor. I don't know why I would want to take his opinions about what's the best automobile seriously, but if I wanted to know how to do a great scene and deliver a piece of dialogue effectively on the silver screen, yeah, he'd be a great person to talk to, sure. But being popular and well-liked, or, you know, in one area, doesn't give you the expertise or knowledge to be a credible sponsor of a product like that. That's a good example, good. Sometimes we see even like cases of amphiboly. Like here, think about this ambiguous wording. Lowest fare advertised on Holland America, guaranteed. If it just says that, lowest fare advertised on our website, guaranteed. Well, what are we actually being told here? That it's the lowest fare anywhere, or it's just the lowest fare that we have on our website that we will guarantee? I mean, the Capital One Venture card, what's in your wallet? Right, exactly. Is it the card that's the question being referred to? Or is it the money that, or the spending and purchasing power that is the sort of other association with the question, your wallet? Yeah, all very good examples. Sometimes we see the naturalistic fallacy. That's also quite common. You know, the ad will say, hey, buy these cigarettes because they're natural. Or, you know, Coca-Cola puts out a new drink and it's called like Coke, I don't know, green. And they say, oh, we've got real sugar in it this time. But it's the same basic product with the same kind of health impact. So, you know, a lot of times they know that people are all looking for something that's natural because we're found to have this assumption that natural things are good, unnatural things are bad. But a lot of times the claim that it's natural is either weak or unsupported, and whether it is or not isn't necessarily revealing of its value in any case. All right. Sometimes rhetorical devices and misleading language can try to misinform us or exaggerate the value of a product. Euphemisms are often seen. So they talk about here, a small house becomes cozy, quaint, or compact. Old houses are charming or full of character. A software product that is like too cheap is called economical. Okay, so euphemisms are a common tactic of advertisements to get our interest. Sometimes it's hyperbole, you know, like, I don't know, general, like Wheaties, breakfast of champions. Isn't that a little bit of an exaggeration? Like, you're not necessarily a champion of anything just because you ate those Wheaties. Must-see TV, the product, the television lineup for NBC, you know, on Friday nights or something. It's not literally must-see, so you can see hyperbole in another case. Sometimes emotional language is used to drive the sale. You'll see an advertisement that says, this is beautiful, wonderful, you're going to feel alive. It's a miracle, it's fresh, it's light. You know, words like this carry across a connotation with positive emotions. And so that, again, shapes the perspective of the consumer. Sometimes there are poor arguments being made or weak analogies. Like, I think, what company is that? GMC, that says like a rock. Well, what they're trying to get you to think is that, you know, this car that they're selling is like a rock. It's just as stable, it's just as indestructible. But really, there's no relevant comparison between a rock and an automobile. One requires maintenance, and you know, you wear down over time. The other is like a geologic formation. So they're trying to carry over the associations of strengths, durability, sturdiness that come from rocks and apply it to the car. But if not for the use of this false comparison, you know, there'd be no necessary reason to associate those two concepts together. Sometimes they also make hasty generalization from statistics without giving you information about how the sample was selected. So they'll say, like, in one case here, they're talking about the Tempur-Pedic pillow, which they're pretty good pillows, but they have an ad that says this. Tempur-Pedic mattress, our sleep technology is recognized by NASA. Maybe that's already inappropriate authority, but raved about by the media, recommended worldwide by no less than 25,000 medical professionals. So this is an ambiguous term, medical professional. What exactly does that refer to? Because depending on how you define the term, 25,000 might be a small number. If medical professional includes just registered nurses, there are more than 700,000 physicians in the United States and 2.8 million registered nurses. So if we only included those two groups, setting aside chiropractors, massage therapists, nurses' aides, hospital orderlies, if we just have physicians and nurses, then 25,000 would be like 1% of the total sample. So it looks like a big number, but only when you compare it to the actual size of and scope of the category do you see that it's actually not the most impressive claim. Okay. So obviously ads can sometimes be seen in a critical way as damaging to society by using manipulative tactics that create markets for non-essential things that take away your money. But there's also like the positive side of it. Let me just emphasize, though, the remaining points that are sort of critical, since this is critical thinking. They talk about how sometimes another negative practice is the targeting of minorities and the poor. You might be surprised to know that ads for junk food, cigarettes, and alcohol are twice as common in magazines like Ebony and Latina that are directed at people of color than in magazines read primarily by white women like Good Housekeeping. And in countries where people are giving up smoking, that's caused some of these tobacco companies to increase their advertising spending in other nations where the public health information and knowledge is weaker. So it's almost like people that are already disadvantaged socioeconomically and globally are the subject matter of the most intensive advertising efforts, which further intensifies the disparities between the haves and the have-nots. Sometimes ads are for addictive substances too, like alcohol and tobacco, and in that case, they're advertising something for you that you'd probably be better off not even having at all. And also, another fair point of criticism is that we have to pay a large overhead cost to support the advertisers creating these commercials. So because they have to create, or they feel like they have to create all these commercials, advertisements in digital, print, and television, that adds to the bottom line cost of the product to us. It increases the cost of the product or service by as much as 30 or 40%. Because like say you bought placement during the Super Bowl, which is like $1 million for a 30-second spot. Well, now you've spent $1 million. How are you going to recover those costs? You're going to have to recover the cost by adding a little bit more price to the consumer product that the commercial is selling. But isn't that ironic? It means that we, the consumer, due to this status quo, we are spending a lot of money to pay for the commercials that are being used to convince us to buy more of the product. So if there was a little less emphasis on marketing madness, then products and services would actually be cheaper to the consumer too. And you also worry sometimes about the lack of competitiveness, because big corporations can consolidate control over the market and crowd out local businesses from having the same degree of competition. So if you're Home Depot and in the same town there's like Joe's Hardware Shop, just a locally owned spot, it's going to be hard for Joe's Hardware Shop to compete with Home Depot because they have so much more advertising money to bring people in through the door. So you could also worry that this situation tends to concentrate power in a few big monopolies and undermines our consumer choices in the end. But, and I just want to take one more minute and I'll finish with this. There's a critical response or a defense of the status quo against any of these points. You could say that the ads do not force us to buy anything. They merely cater to our existing interests and values. And there's also laws that prevent them from making strictly false claims. That would be false advertising. So like if an electronics store said, hey, come in before 12 and we're giving away TVs for $10, and then there's a huge line down the block, and then when they get in, they're like, sorry, we're just kidding. You know, we just wanted to get you in the store. That was not true. But now that you are here, we'll show you what we do have. That would be illegal. That would be false advertising. So you might say there is some type of backstop legally that prevents the most egregious cases of false advertising. They can bend the truth, they can use euphemisms, they can use fallacies, but they can't like say something that is obviously or provably false. And another argument in defense of the status quo is that you can always say that if you really don't trust what the advertiser has said, why don't you go and check on other sources of product information like consumer reports or crowdsourced information. So like a restaurant is never going to put out a commercial that says there's some questionable things about our food. But if you go to Yelp, there's going to be some perhaps reviewers that you can review and read, which will show you maybe a more honest assessment of their product or their business. And you can also say that if we wanted to crack down on this advertising and make it more fair and honest, then that might actually inhibit the freedom of speech that the companies have when they create the ads. So we kind of got to balance our priorities. And you can also reply to the concerns about monopolization by saying that that's just the free market and the winner's winning. You know, so if Walmart and Home Depot have managed to accumulate so much of the market share that it's crowding out the small businesses, that must be what the consumers want. Because if everybody rejected and refused to buy from Walmart, then the small businesses would still be thriving and doing well. So maybe we just are in a world where the market dictates that those big businesses are the winners and the winners win, so they deserve to have their advantages. That's another argument that some can make. But wherever you stand on this sort of debatable point about the value and critical analysis of media, it's still worth knowing and making clear that you should remain vigilant about advertising messages and see if they are trying to manipulate you, critically engage with the ads. Okay, guys, so that's all. Sorry I took a few extra minutes there, but I wanted to make sure I got in everything that I had in my notes. So thanks everyone so much. I'll be in touch with you guys over the weekend. I'll be notifying you about the upcoming next homework assignment. And as I've said, anybody who wants to know anything about their grade, any of the other assignments, except for the recent quiz that you just took, the other stuff's graded, and I can help you with your scores. Okay, guys, so thanks again. Have a good day. hopefully you're safe from the fires and all that. But yeah, have a great weekend, and I'll be in touch. Thanks. Bye-bye.